The crystal chandelier cast fractured light across the marble floor as Song Mi-ra hurried through the executive corridor of Stellar Corporation. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished surface, a sound that seemed to echo her place in this world of glass towers and designer suits. The cleaning cart rattled behind her, its wheels protesting the early morning rush. She had exactly 30 minutes to finish the 42nd floor before the executives arrived. The CEO's office required special attention. Not a speck of dust could remain on the mahogany desk where million-dollar deals were signed daily. Mi-ra had learned this the hard way during her first week, when a single coffee ring had resulted in a 15-minute lecture from the floor supervisor. As she approached the corner office, voices drifted through the partially open door. Her heart sank. The meeting had started early. "The quarterly projections are unacceptable," a deep voice cut through the air like a blade. Park Jin-woo's tone carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind that could make grown men tremble. "I want solutions, not excuses." Mi-ra hesitated, her hand frozen on the cart handle. She could retreat, wait for the meeting to end, but the supervisor's warnings echoed in her mind. The office had to be cleaned before 9 a.m., no exceptions. Taking a deep breath, she knocked softly and pushed the door open just enough to slip inside. The massive office stretched before her, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Seoul's skyline like a living painting. Around the conference table, 6 executives sat rigid in their chairs, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. At the head of the table stood Park Jin-woo, his tall frame imposing even in stillness. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to perfection. When his cold eyes landed on Mi-ra, the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. "What?" he said slowly, each word dripping with disdain. "Do you think you're doing?" Mi-ra's fingers tightened around the cleaning cloth, her knuckles white against the pale fabric. The silence in the room was suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 42 floors below. 6 pairs of executive eyes watched her like predators studying prey, but it was Park Jin-woo's gaze that made her feel truly small. "I'm sorry, sir," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was told to clean the office before 9 a.m. I can come back later." "You were told?" Jin-woo's eyebrows rose, his expression shifting from annoyance to something approaching fury. "Do you see us having a meeting? Do you understand what 'do not disturb' means?" The executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mi-ra had witnessed Jin-woo's legendary temper before, but never directed at someone so far beneath his notice. Usually, his anger was reserved for incompetent managers or failed projects worth millions. "Sir, I really didn't mean to interrupt." "Didn't mean to?" Jin-woo stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "You walk into my meeting during crucial negotiations, and you didn't mean to interrupt. What exactly did you mean to do?" Mi-ra's cheeks burned with humiliation. She could feel the weight of judgment from everyone in the room, their silent relief that they weren't the target of their CEO's wrath. Her cleaning uniform suddenly felt like a scarlet letter, marking her as an intruder in this world of power and privilege. "I meant to do my job," she said quietly, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Something flickered across Jin-woo's face. Surprise, perhaps, or irritation at her response. He wasn't accustomed to being answered back, especially not by someone whose monthly salary was less than what he spent on lunch. "Your job," he repeated slowly, "is to be invisible, to clean when we're not here, to not exist in our world." The words hit Mi-ra like physical blows, each one designed to remind her of her place. The rest of the day passed in a blur of whispered conversations and sideways glances. Word of the morning's confrontation had spread through the building's service corridors like wildfire. Other cleaning staff approached Mi-ra with a mixture of sympathy and fear, as if Jin-woo's anger might be contagious. "You should have waited," Mrs. Kim, the head of housekeeping, said during lunch break. Her weathered hands wrapped around a cup of instant coffee, steam rising between them like incense. "Mr. Park doesn't forgive easily. I've seen people fired for less." Mira stared at her own untouched meal, her appetite lost somewhere between the morning's humiliation and the afternoon's anxiety. She needed this job desperately. The small apartment she shared with her younger brother depended on her steady income, and jobs were scarce for someone with her limited education. "I knocked," she said finally. "I tried to be respectful." Mrs. Kim's expression softened. "Respect doesn't matter to people like him. We're furniture to them, useful when needed, invisible when not." The words stung because they rang true. In her 6 months at Stellar Corporation, Mira had perfected the art of invisibility. She knew which executives preferred their coffee at exactly 180 degrees, which ones left personal items scattered across their desks, and which ones never acknowledged her presence even when she was cleaning around them. But invisibility was a double-edged sword. It protected her from unwanted attention while simultaneously erasing her humanity. That afternoon, as she cleaned the lower floors, Mira found herself thinking about Jin-woo's words. "To not exist in our world." The phrase echoed in her mind, each repetition cutting deeper than the last. She wondered if he truly saw her as nothing more than a ghost haunting his pristine corporate kingdom. The irony wasn't lost on her. In another life, another world, she might have sat at that conference table herself. Over the following weeks, a disturbing pattern emerged. Jin-woo seemed to find fault with Mira's work at every opportunity, his criticism sharp and public. If she cleaned his office in the morning, he complained about streaks on the windows. If she waited until evening, he questioned why his workspace smelled of cleaning chemicals during important calls. "The trash bin is 2 inches from where it should be," he announced during a board meeting, his voice carrying across the room as Mira emptied the wastebaskets. "Do we pay for precision or mediocrity?" The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Even they seemed to recognize that Jin-woo's behavior had crossed from demanding into something more personal, but none dared question the CEO who had tripled the company's profits in 5 years. Mira endured each public humiliation with quiet dignity, her face a mask of professional composure, but inside anger began to simmer alongside the hurt. She had done nothing to deserve this treatment beyond existing in his space, breathing his air, reminding him that not everyone lived in his rarefied world. During her lunch breaks, she began researching Park Jin-woo. The internet painted a picture of a business prodigy who had inherited Stellar Corporation at 28 and transformed it into a global powerhouse. Magazines called him brilliant, ruthless, and untouchable. They mentioned his Harvard MBA, his penthouse apartment, his collection of vintage cars. None mentioned his capacity for cruelty toward those who couldn't fight back. "Why do you let him treat you like that?" asked Jung Soo-jin, a secretary from the 35th floor who had become Mira's only friend in the building. They sat in the small break room, sharing vending machine coffee and day-old pastries. Mira considered the question carefully. "Because fighting back would mean losing everything," she said finally, "and I can't afford to lose everything." But even as she spoke the words, she wondered how long her dignity could withstand Jin-woo's systematic assault. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Mira arrived at 5 a.m., 2 hours before the executives, and began her routine. The building felt different in the early morning darkness, less imposing, more human. Without the constant hum of ambition and competition, she could almost pretend she belonged there. She was cleaning Jin-woo's office when she noticed the photograph on his desk had been moved. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, But Mira had memorized every detail of the room through weeks of meticulous cleaning. The silver frame, which usually sat at a precise angle facing his chair, had been turned slightly toward the window. Curiosity overcame caution. She stepped closer, cloth still in hand, and looked at the photograph properly for the first time. It showed a much younger Jin-woo standing beside an elderly woman in a hospital bed. The woman's face was gaunt but smiling, her hand clasped in his. Despite his youth, Jin-woo's expression carried a weight that seemed too heavy for his shoulders. "What do you think you're doing?" Mira spun around, her heart hammering against her ribs. Jin-woo stood in the doorway, his face dark with fury. He was earlier than usual, his hair slightly disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "I was just cleaning." "You were snooping." He strode across the room, his movements sharp and predatory. "Going through my personal things like some common thief." "No, I wasn't. Don't lie to me." His voice rose, echoing off the glass walls. "I've been watching you, waiting for you to show your true nature. This is what you people do, isn't it? Look for opportunities to steal, to blackmail, to take what doesn't belong to you." The accusation hit Mira like a physical blow. After weeks of enduring his contempt, something inside her finally snapped. "You people?" she repeated, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "What exactly do you mean by that, Mr. Park?" Jin-woo's eyes narrowed at her tone, unused to being challenged by anyone, let alone someone he considered beneath his notice. "You know exactly what I mean. People who don't belong here, who take jobs they're not qualified for, who what?" Mira interrupted, her fear finally overwhelmed by righteous anger. "Who work 3 jobs to support their families, who clean up after people who treat them like dirt, who have dignity despite what you think." "Dignity?" Jin-woo laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "You're a maid. You clean toilets for a living. What would you know about dignity?" The words hung in the air between them, ugly and irreversible. Mira felt something fundamental shift inside her, a wall that had been holding back years of accumulated hurt and frustration finally crumbling. "More than you know about basic human decency," she said quietly. Jin-woo's face flushed red. How dare you speak to me like that? Do you have any idea who I am? What I could do to you?" "I know exactly who you are," Mira replied, her voice gaining strength. "You're Park Jin-woo, CEO of Stellar Corporation, Harvard MBA, orphaned at 15 when your grandmother died. Built this company from the ground up to honor her memory." Jin-woo's expression shifted from anger to shock. "How do you—" "I also know you donate anonymously to 3 different orphanages, that you visit children's hospitals every Christmas, that you've never missed sending flowers to your grandmother's grave on the anniversary of her death." Mira's voice softened slightly. "I know you're not the monster you pretend to be." The silence that followed was deafening. Jin-woo stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, his carefully constructed mask of indifference cracking around the edges. "You don't know anything about me," he said finally, but the conviction had gone out of his voice. "I know enough," Mira replied. "I know you're hurting, and I know that hurting other people won't make your pain go away." The confrontation left both of them shaken. Jin-woo retreated behind his desk, his usual commanding presence diminished by Mira's unexpected insight. She stood her ground, no longer the invisible servant, but a woman who had dared to see past his carefully constructed facade. "You researched me," he said finally, his voice lacking its usual edge. "I tried to understand you," Mira corrected. "There's a difference." Jin-woo's fingers drummed against the mahogany surface, a nervous habit he'd developed during his grandmother's illness. "Understanding doesn't give you the right to psychoanalyze me." "No," Mira agreed, "but it gives me the right to defend myself when you attack me for no reason." The words hit their mark. Jin-woo had built his reputation on being fair if demanding. His treatment of Mira had been neither fair nor justified, and they both knew it. "I don't attack people without reason," he said, but the protest sounded weak even to his own ears. "Then what's your reason?" Mira challenged. "What have I done besides exist in your space, besides remind you that not everyone was born into privilege?" Jin-woo's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about my privileges." "I know you didn't start with them," Mira said softly. "I know you earned everything you have. That makes your treatment of me even more inexcusable." The observation cut deep because it was true. Jin-woo had clawed his way up from nothing, had known hunger and uncertainty, and the particular humiliation of being looked down upon by those who had never struggled. He had sworn never to become like the people who had dismissed him, yet here he was, wielding his power like a weapon against someone who couldn't fight back. "You should get back to work," he said finally, unable to meet her eyes. Mira nodded, but she didn't move immediately. "Mr. Park," she said quietly, "your grandmother would be proud of what you've built, but I don't think she'd be proud of who you've become." News of the confrontation spread through the building's invisible network of service workers, but the story that emerged was different from what either Jin-woo or Mira expected. Instead of being fired or transferred, Mira found herself treated with a new kind of respect by her colleagues. "You actually stood up to him," whispered Lee Min-ho, a security guard who had worked at Stella for over a decade. "And you're still here?" Mira shrugged, unsure how to explain what had happened in Jin-woo's office. The conversation had felt like a turning point, though she couldn't say toward what. "Maybe he's not as terrible as we thought," suggested Soo-jin during their lunch break. "Maybe he just needed someone to call him out. Or maybe he's planning something worse," Mrs. Kim warned darkly. "Men like that don't forgive easily." But as the days passed, something unexpected happened. Jin-woo's behavior toward Mira changed, becoming less openly hostile and more confused. He still found fault with her work, but his criticism lacked its previous venom. Sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. The real surprise came on a Thursday afternoon when Mira was cleaning the executive break room. She was wiping down the coffee machine when she heard familiar voices approaching. "The Park Foundation dinner is next week," said Director Choi, Jin-woo's second-in-command. "Have you decided on the guest list?" "The usual suspects," Jin-woo replied, his voice carrying that familiar note of boredom. "Politicians, other CEOs, people who write big checks and expect their names on plaques." "What about personal guests? Family?" There was a long pause. "You know, I don't have family, Choi." "Friends, then. Someone who actually cares about the cause rather than the tax deduction." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll think about it." Mira continued cleaning, but her mind was racing. The Park Foundation, she had read about it during her research. Jin-woo's charitable organization focused on education and healthcare for underprivileged children. It was his grandmother's legacy, the one thing he seemed to care about more than profit margins. The envelope appeared on Mira's cleaning cart 3 days later, cream-colored and expensive, her name written in elegant script across the front. She stared at it for a full minute before opening it, certain there had been some mistake. "The Park Foundation cordially invites you to attend our annual charity dinner." Mira read the invitation 3 times before the words sank in. The dinner was black tie, held at Seoul's most exclusive hotel, attended by the city's elite. It was exactly the kind of event where someone like her would be invisible, except as part of the serving staff. "This has to be a joke," she murmured, turning the heavy cardstock over in her hands. "What's a joke?" Soo-jin appeared beside her, eyes widening when she saw the invitation. "Oh my God, Mira! This is real! This is actually happening! But why?" Mira's mind raced through possibilities, none of them making sense. Why would he invite me? Maybe he feels guilty about how he's treated you. Park Jin-woo doesn't feel guilty about anything. But even as she said it, Mira remembered the look in his eyes during their confrontation, the way his mask had slipped to reveal something vulnerable underneath. Maybe guilt wasn't the right word, but there had definitely been something. That afternoon, she found herself standing outside Jin-woo's office, the invitation clutched in her hand. She knocked softly and entered when he called out, "Mr. Park, I received this invitation, but I think there's been a mistake." "There's no mistake." He didn't look up from his computer screen, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "The foundation dinner is next Friday, 7 p.m. But I don't understand why. You said I wasn't the monster I pretend to be." Finally, he looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Consider this your chance to prove it." Mira stared at him, trying to decode the challenge in his words. "I don't have anything appropriate to wear to an event like that." For the first time since she'd known him, Jin-woo's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "That's been taken care of." The dress arrived the next morning, delivered to Mira's small apartment by a courier who seemed as surprised as she was by the address. The box was from Seoul's most exclusive boutique, the kind of place where a single accessory cost more than Mira's monthly rent. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. Deep navy silk that seemed to shimmer with its own light, cut in elegant lines that would flatter without being ostentatious. Beneath it lay matching shoes, a delicate necklace, and a small clutch purse. "Honey, you look like a princess," breathed her younger brother Tae-min, using the formal address that always made her smile. At 16, he was all gangly limbs and earnest enthusiasm, working part-time at a convenience store while maintaining top grades at school. "I feel like I'm playing dress-up," Mira admitted, studying herself in their small mirror. The transformation was startling. She looked like she belonged in Jin-woo's world, at least on the surface. "Why is your boss doing this?" Taemin asked, perched on the edge of her bed. "I thought you said he was mean to you." Mira considered how to explain something she didn't fully understand herself. I think he's trying to prove something. To himself, maybe. Or maybe he likes you," Taemin suggested with the casual wisdom of youth. "Don't be ridiculous," Mira said quickly, but the thought sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. The hotel ballroom was a vision of crystal and gold, filled with Seoul's most powerful and influential citizens. Mira felt every eye on her as she entered, acutely aware that she didn't belong despite her elegant appearance. The conversations around her were peppered with references to stock prices, political connections, and vacation homes in places she'd only seen in magazines. She was studying the silent auction items when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "You came." Mira turned to find Jin-woo watching her, resplendent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken questions hanging between them. "You invited me," she said simply. "I wasn't sure you would accept." The dinner proceeded with the choreographed precision of high society, each course accompanied by speeches about the foundation's work. Mira found herself seated at Jin-woo's table, surrounded by board members and major donors, who treated her with polite curiosity, tinged with confusion about her presence. "And you work where, dear?" asked Mrs. Yoon, the wife of a prominent politician, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Stellar Corporation," Mira replied honestly, not specifying her role. "How wonderful. In what capacity?" Before Mira could answer, Jin-woo's voice cut through the conversation. "Ms. Song is one of our most dedicated employees. She ensures our work environment maintains the highest standards." It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Mira shot him a grateful look, surprised by his intervention. The evening's highlight was Jin-woo's keynote speech about the Foundation's mission. As he spoke about providing opportunities for underprivileged children, his usual corporate demeanor fell away, replaced by genuine passion. This was the man Mi-ra had glimpsed in her research, the one who remembered what it felt like to have nothing and was determined to help others escape that fate. "Education isn't just about knowledge," he said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "It's about dignity. It's about believing you have value regardless of where you come from or how little your family has. Every child deserves to feel that they matter." Mi-ra felt tears prick her eyes, understanding now why he had invited her. This wasn't about charity or guilt, it was about recognition. He was acknowledging that she mattered, that her dignity had value, despite their different circumstances. After the speech, as guests mingled over coffee and dessert, Jin-woo appeared at her side. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They stepped onto the hotel's terrace. Seoul's glittering skyline spread before them like a constellation fallen to earth. The night air was cool against Mi-ra's skin, a welcome relief from the ballroom's stifling atmosphere. "Thank you," she said finally, "for tonight, for the dress, for defending me in there." Jin-woo leaned against the railing, his profile sharp against the city lights. "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything," Mi-ra said, though they both knew it wasn't true. Jin-woo turned to face her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I've been cruel to you. Deliberately, systematically cruel, and you didn't deserve any of it." The admission hung between them, heavy with months of accumulated hurt and misunderstanding. Mi-ra had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was here, she found herself struggling for words. "Why?" she asked finally. "What did I do to make you hate me so much?" Jin-woo was quiet for so long that Mi-ra thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You reminded me of who I used to be, and I hated that person." The confession was so unexpected, so raw, that Mi-ra felt her breath catch. "What do you mean?" "Before my grandmother died, before I inherited the company, I was nobody. Worse than nobody. I was the charity case, the scholarship kid who didn't belong. I cleaned offices to pay for school, just like you do now." His hands gripped the railing until his knuckles went white. "When I saw you in my office that first day, so determined to do your job despite everything, it brought back memories I'd spent years trying to forget." Mi-ra stared at him, pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. "So you decided to make me feel as small as you once felt?" "Yes." The word was barely audible, "and I'm ashamed of that. I'm ashamed of what I became." The honesty in his voice was devastating. Mi-ra had expected anger, defensiveness, maybe even dismissal. She hadn't expected this broken vulnerability, this glimpse of the scared boy hiding beneath the powerful CEO's facade. "Your grandmother," she said softly. "She would be disappointed in you." Jin-woo flinched as if she'd struck him. "I know. But she would also forgive you, because that's what love does. It sees the best in us, even when we can't see it ourselves." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "See the good in people who don't deserve it." The weeks following the charity dinner brought subtle but significant changes to Stellar Corporation. Jin-woo's treatment of the service staff became noticeably more respectful, though he maintained his demanding standards. He learned names, acknowledged good work, and stopped using his position as a weapon against those who couldn't fight back. For Mi-ra, the changes were more personal. Jin-woo began greeting her when their paths crossed, asking about her brother's studies, even recommending scholarship programs that might help with Taemin's university aspirations. Their conversations were brief and professional, but they carried an undercurrent of mutual respect that hadn't existed before. "He's different," Soo-jin observed during one of their lunch breaks. Quieter, maybe. Less angry. Mira nodded, though she wasn't sure how to explain the transformation she'd witnessed. The man who had once seemed carved from ice was revealing himself to be surprisingly human, capable of growth and change in ways she hadn't thought possible. The real test came on a rainy Thursday afternoon when Mira discovered Jin-woo in his office, staring at the photograph on his desk with an expression of profound sadness. It was the anniversary of his grandmother's death. She knew because she'd seen the flowers being delivered to the cemetery that morning. "Mr. Park," she said softly from the doorway. "Is everything all right?" He looked up, and for a moment his mask slipped completely. "She died 10 years ago today, and I still don't know if I'm the man she wanted me to become." Mira entered the office without invitation, her heart aching for the lost boy she could see in his eyes. "Tell me about her." And, surprisingly, he did. He told her about the woman who had raised him after his parents died, who had worked 3 jobs to keep him in school, who had believed in his potential even when he couldn't see it himself. He spoke of her kindness, her strength, her unwavering faith that education could lift him out of poverty. "She never lived to see any of this," he said, gesturing at the opulent office. "Never knew that her sacrifices paid off." "She knew," Mira said with quiet certainty. "She knew because she saw who you really are. Underneath all the success and power, she saw your heart." 6 months later, Mira stood in the same office where Jin-woo had once humiliated her, but everything had changed. She wore a tailored business suit instead of a cleaning uniform, her hair styled professionally, her posture confident. The nameplate on the desk read, "Song Mira, Director of Employee Relations," a position Jin-woo had created specifically for her after learning about her business degree, earned through night classes while working multiple jobs. "The new employee orientation program is ready for your review," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "I think you'll be pleased with the emphasis on dignity and respect." Jin-woo smiled, a real smile, not the corporate mask he wore for board meetings. "I'm sure I will be. You have excellent instincts for what people need." Their relationship had evolved slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. The attraction that had sparked between them that night on the hotel terrace had grown into something deeper, a partnership that transcended their different backgrounds and past conflicts. "There's something else," Mira said, her tone shifting to something more personal. "The scholarship fund you established in your grandmother's name, Tai-min wants to be the first recipient." "He's earned it," Jin-woo replied. "His grades are exceptional, and his essay about overcoming adversity was moving." They stood together at the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching Seoul's bustling streets below. The city looked different from this height, less intimidating, more full of possibility. "Do you ever regret it?" Jin-woo asked quietly. "Giving up cleaning to work with me?" Mira considered the question seriously. "I regret that it took us so long to see each other clearly, but I don't regret where we ended up." He reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "My grandmother would have liked you," he said. "She always said the measure of a person isn't where they start, but how they choose to treat others along the way." "Then I think she would be proud of both of us," Mira replied, squeezing his hand gently. Outside, the sun was setting over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. In the reflection of the window, they could see themselves, no longer CEO and maid, but 2 people who had found their way to each other through understanding, forgiveness, and the courage to change.